Hello and welcome to the next episode in our little mini-series whereby we're looking at the very latest technology we find on our modern motorbikes and we add it to your older generation BMWs. So that's 2004 through to 2013. What we're going to be doing today is adding Weiser-Technik's dual function kits on the front, triple function kits on the rear, and what you'll end up with are these super bright running lights and these super bright indicators. And I can't tell you how different these are to the standard incandescent bulbs. The camera really doesn't do it justice. They are just so much more brighter, and anything that we can have on our motorbikes that improves visibility and safety is definitely worth considering. So I'll turn the bike around in a moment and show you that on the rear we have three functions. Now inside those modules there's a little tiny switch so that you can decide during the installation whether you have two functions or three functions, and that's quite important for those of us that live in Europe because there are some lighting laws that prevent us from having multiple running lights or tail lights on the rear, but there's a little switch inside that you can switch over. So I'll turn the bike around, I'll show you the rear, and then I'll show you how easy this kit is to install. So let us first look at option 2. This is how your PCBs come set up when you take them out the box. So we've got the ignition on and we've got our hazard warning lights on. Now importantly, when we put the foot brake on, the foot brake is not allowed to work inside those indicators, allowing those hazards to perform their single function of letting road users know behind. We've put our hazards on for a good reason. Now if I turn the hazards off, then the system reverts back to three tail lights or three running lights. So that's what you can see here, and this is option 2 as it comes set up out the box. And then when we add in our foot brake, off, on, off, on. I hope this comes across. They're incredibly bright. Let's put on one of the indicators. So when the indicator starts to function, it turns off the running light inside the side where the indicator's working, because what we want is road users to see our indicator nice and clearly, which is what's really confusing with our modern bikes. And then when I add in the foot brake is still allowed to work over there on the left hand side. So we've got foot brake off, foot brake on, foot brake off. So that's what this system does when it comes from the factory in option 2. We have these extra running lights on both sides to give us extra visibility. For example, in the UK, in North America, in the USA and Canada and Australia, this is going to be the setup that you're probably going to prefer. But for those of us that live in Europe, we are strangely not allowed to have three tail lights or three running lights running on the rear of our bike. And that's why I'm going to show you the second option, which is called option 1. Now let's have a look at option 1, which is the second setting within these modules on the back. So currently we've got the ignition on and we've got our hazard warning lights on. When I apply the foot brake doesn't illuminate in either indicator, because then it's keeping our hazard working just as they're meant to be, as a hazard warning light to let road users know behind there's a hazard, and that's why we've got them on. So if I turn the hazards off, then what we find is that these running lights aren't active inside those indicators, so that the indicator is free to do its single job. So on this side, on the right hand side, we're indicating. If I add in the brake light, we've got that super bright brake light over there on the left hand side. So we've got it off, we've got it on. Turn the indicator off, and one more time I'll put those super bright brake lights on. It is really hard to capture this on the camera. They are so much brighter. I mean, Weiser-Technik say something like 10 times brighter. I think they're probably a bit more than that. But this is option 1. So for those of us in Europe where we have some strange rules and regulations with regards to tail lights, we're not allowed to have three tail lights or three running lights active on the rear of our motorbike. So if we've got the center one on, we can't have two additional ones. So that is why Weiser-Technik have put option 1 on the PCB so that we can turn it off. Let's move on. So up here on the right hand side are the timestamps and the chapter markers. I've put them up at the beginning of the video to help you navigate through because it is going to be quite a long detailed video. Now not everyone is going to need to watch the whole video from start to finish. It depends on your skill level because the instructions that come from Weiser-Technik, they're well written, they're easy to follow, and there is in fact a circuit diagram included. But for those of you that have never done this sort of thing before, this is what this video is all about. And I suggest you start at the beginning, go all the way through to the end, and then when you do your install, then come back to here and use these chapter markers to find the extra information you need assistance with. Now, there is one section, I'm going to highlight this right at the beginning because it is a common thing that people make a mistake with. They don't read the instructions thoroughly enough. On the BMW bike, there are two specific cables we're looking to find at the rear. They are a grey and black cable with yellow banding and a grey and a red cable with yellow banding. Now I'm highlighting the fact that these have got yellow banding on because BMW do in fact have other cables that are in fact grey and black and grey and red. We do not want them, we want the ones with the yellow banding, but that will become clear later in the episode. So let me show you the tools that we're going to use, and one last thing, the kit that we're going to use all the parts that come from Weiser-Technik. If you are a professional installer, then of course there are other tools that you can use. There's other equipment to give you a neater, more professional install, but what we're going to do today, we're just going to go through it step by step with the kit that comes from Weiser-Technik because this is what most people are going to do. Let's get started. So these are the basic tools that we're going to need to complete the installation. A pair of wire cutters, a pair of wire strippers, a Phillips screwdriver, a flat blade screwdriver, a ratchet screwdriver with a TX30 and a TX25. Now these two here, these are optional. You will need a 6mm Allen key for taking the rack off on the back of the bike. I'm using a 3/8 ratchet with a 6mm bit. But also this thing here, this is a stitch unpicker. You can pick them up off of Amazon or eBay. They're absolutely brilliant devices for unpicking the cloth tape that goes around the BMW harness. When we go to identify the wires on the rear of the bike, these are very useful for that. And then the only additional things really are some cardboard pieces to keep our bolts in order and some cloth tape. Now this is obviously the basic set of tools that we need if you are a professional installer. There are of course other tools, better tools that you can use, but we are going to be sticking to the basic installation. There are other bits of equipment that you can use to give yourself a slightly neater, tidier installation, but this is what we're going to use today. So what we have here, this is the complete kit, all the parts that you receive in the combination kit. So this will include your dual function for the front and your triple function for the rear. Let me explain this in a bit more detail. So you're going to get your two modules. Both of these have 24 LEDs. 12 of them are for the indicator and 12 of them are for those bright white running lights that we're going to add to the front. So this is the front section. Then over here we've got our rear modules. These two here, these both have 3 functions. You also have an installation kit specific to the front of the bike and an installation kit specific to the rear of the bike. But what's common between all the kits is this wiring harness, and I'm going to explain this in more detail in just a moment. But before we move on, one more thing I'd like to highlight. On the rear of the printed circuit boards that are going to go to the rear of the bike, you can set the bike up to have 3 functions, or if you want, you can just have 2 functions, and that is easily changed by while you're doing the installation using this jumper switch on here, and I'll put some close-ups on the screen. And now this is really important because for those of us that live in Europe or in countries where there are some rules and regulations that prevent us from having 3 tail running lights, which is what we do in Europe, this little jumper switch is really important because then we can go from 3 functions to 2 functions, still have our super bright indicators, our super bright brake lights, but we can turn off that running function to comply with the laws. So just so you're aware, whichever kit you order, if you order the dual function for the front, you're going to receive this section over here. So you'll get your harness, your box, your 2 modules and your wiring kit. Now if you buy just the rear kit, you're going to get everything over on this side. From there, you're still going to get your relay, your box with your 2 printed circuit boards and your installation kit. So let me unpack this and explain this in a bit more detail, because it's really important to understand that we're not going to be cutting any wires on the BMW system, because inside both of these packs are all the equipment that we need to have a nice clean install. Let me show you this kit. So this solid state wiring harness that comes in the kit, it is the same part whether you buy the dual function for the front or the triple function for the rear. If you buy the combination kit, you just get the one relay, because that's all we need. Now this is why a lot of people get confused. They get a little worried because they see all of these wires and they're not sure that they're going to be able to connect them and do it properly. But let me assure you, I'm going to take you through step by step and then explain exactly what each of these cables does and how to connect it to the motorbike. So let me give you a simple overview. I am going to go through it in detail as we go through the motorbike. We've got our 2 battery connections. That's really obvious. Over here we've got our inline fuse. The fuse is supplied removed when it comes from Weiser-Technik. We're going to put this somewhere safe. We only install the fuse into the fuse holder once we finish with the whole installation and we've done a quick check. And then we've got our 4 cables. We've got black, grey, yellow, red. Let me explain what they do. So the simplest way to understand this is the yellow and the red, they are inputs. They are going to pick up an input signal from the CANbus system on the motorbike to switch on the relay, which then turns on the outputs. So the black and the grey are outputs that are going to go to the PCB's front and rear. So let me explain in a bit more detail. So the red wire up here, this is looking for an ignition on signal from a wire on the motorbike, which turns the relay on, which switches the output on to this black cable. Now the black cable we are going to connect to all 4 PCBs, because that's going to give us our super bright white running lights on the front and our running lights on the rear. Now the yellow cable, this is going to pick up a signal from the brake light circuit. So whether you apply the handbrake or the foot brake, this wire is going to pick up a signal from that braking circuit to switch the relay on, to turn on output to the grey wire. Now the grey wire, this one here, is only going to go to the rear because we've got our brake lights on these 2 PCBs on the rear, and that really is in essence what we've got to do. It is in fact very simple. Now we do not have to cut any wires on the BMW system because we're going to be using a couple of these during the installation. I'll show you how to use these as we go through. They are very simple to use, but in essence what we're going to be doing, because these 2 wires, the yellow and the red, are inputs, we're going to be picking up a CANbus signal by making a very, very small hole in 2 cables, ignition on and the brake light trigger, to then operate the relay to turn these 2 outputs on. It is in fact very easy. Now inside the Weiser-Technik box you're also going to find your instructions. They're very easy to read. There's also a very detailed circuit diagram, and I'll put a close-up, a much bigger image of that on the screen so you can understand what we're going to do. But this is the wiring harness, and this is in essence how it functions. If you are just fitting the dual function on the front, all you would need to connect is the 2 battery cables and the ignition on red wire, which then turns the output on to the black wire, which turns on the extra running lights on the front. So if you were doing the modules on the front, we'd only be using 2 of these cables. But for the complete kit, we're going to use all 6 of the cables, the 2 that go to the battery, the 2 inputs and the 2 outputs. Let me show you just how easy this is to install on your motorbike. So the first part that we need to remove is this plastic assembly on the back of the bike. Now it's only held on with 3 bolts. They're TX30, they're very easy to take off. We've got one here, we've got one in exactly the opposite side of the bike over on this side, on the left-hand side, and then we've got one down here, this one here in the center. And this is where we're going to use our very first piece of cardboard. And one other tip that you can do is write the number of the stage that you're working on, so that when you come to reassemble everything, you just assemble everything back in the reverse order. So I've written number 1 and I've got 3 holes ready for these screws, or rather these bolts. So I'll take these off, I'll speed this up, and then we'll move on to the next section. So before we proceed to remove this plastic panel here, there is one more important thing to do, is when we took off this top carrier mount, there are in fact these little spacers that sit on the side, and if I lift one out with my finger, we've got one on the right and we've got one over here on the left hand side. So what I suggest you do is put those in your cardboard with your bolts so that we can't lose them for later on. So this plastic housing, this is retained by 8 bolts. Now there is one additional bolt that we're only going to undo. We're not going to remove it because that will make it easier for disassembly. We are going to need our TX30, and we're also going to need an Allen key. Now this is a 6mm Allen key, and that is to undo these on the side, these mounting points, because we need to remove those to get to one hidden bolt behind here. So again, I'll speed this up, but in essence what we have is 1, 2 TX30, 3, 4 TX30. These ones that are slightly hidden behind here, TX30, 5, 6. We need to remove these, which are the 6mm Allen, that's 7, 8. And then there is one more screw, which I'm going to show you a close up in a minute. We're just going to undo it. We're not going to remove it. And then this panel easily removes. And then that is the preparation for the rear of the bike done. Just bear in mind that on the side here, these are plastic and they have a little bit of movement, and we can pull both of them outwards to help lift this up. But let me reposition the camera and show you the one other screw that we're just going to loosen. So now we're looking at the front left-hand side where the key goes into the lock at the front of the bike. And there is in fact this one bolt here. This is a different size. This is the TX25. And what we need to do is we need to undo this probably 3 turns, just like that, just enough to get it loose so that we can slide. And if I'm careful, you'll see the mechanism unhinge from that point on there under that bolt. And then all we need to do is very carefully lift these panels out on the side, like so, left and right, and then we can just carefully lift this whole assembly completely off the bike. Now just one thing to bear in mind, these rubbers, these ones here, do sometimes fall off, and one has fallen off on the floor already. So when you go to put these back on, if I move that around, they look like this and they actually clip into here and they rest on the mechanism on the side. So let's move on. So we are progressing really quickly. The next section, we're looking at the front right hand side of the bike. We need to remove this section here, and it is incredibly easy. You don't need to worry. We've just got 1, 2 and a 3rd bolt up here. They are TX25, and then this whole panel will remove. So I'll speed this bit up, but it is really very, very straightforward. So with those 3 TX25 bolts removed, this panel very, very easily comes off. Now all we need to do is we're going to pull it gently towards it, rotate it, and then it will lift on. It's actually held on with a couple of clips up here. I'll show you how they go back on, and then that just pulls straight off. Now the locating pin is this plastic plug here, and that's going to locate up here on the front. And the other thing to pay attention to is we have these 2 clips on the top, one here and one here. So I'll just refit this to show you how this goes back on. So we're going to look for our locating pin first, this one over there in the corner, rotate the panel up, push the pin in like that, and then if I'm quiet and we press with a little bit of pressure inwards, you'll hear these top 2 click into place. That's it. So then we would be ready when we're doing the reassembly to put those 3 bolts in. So let me move on and show you the last panel that we need to remove, which is this one here. So with this one, we only have 2 screws, both again TX25. So place your 2 screws in the cardboard, and then this panel just gently lifts out like so. Now you have got 2 edges up here that locate on these 2 points here. So when we do the reassembly, which I'm not going to show you because it's just going to be very, very simple, the reverse, you go in at a slight angle like so, and then it just clips into place. And then we can line this up, move it slightly left or right to put these 2 screws in. So now we've got that last panel removed, we are ready to get on with the installation. So take your Phillips screwdriver, remove the screw on the back, and then very carefully take your outer lens off. Then what we're going to do, we're going to take our flat blade screwdriver, working in from this side, a gentle wiggle, and then that whole reflector assembly with the bulb will just tip out like so. And then it's just a case of carefully undoing these connections on the back of the reflector. Sometimes they're a little tight, like this one is. And then you'll notice what happens is that the second part of the housing falls off. So at this point, what we're going to do, we're going to take our visor locking key like so, and then we're going to insert it into that gap in there and gently wiggle it and press it firmly into place inside. And now that keeps both parts of the housing firmly in place so that we can get on with the rest of the install. So my preference is to go around and do all four corners, take the lenses off, take the reflectors out, put the locking keys in, and then you can move on to the next step. So inside the kit, you're going to find this electronic relay. So the one thing I want to highlight at the very beginning is be very careful. When you open it up, there is a little tiny fuse. This is a 10 amp fuse, and I suggest what you do, you take a piece of cloth tape, you tape the fuse to it, and you put it somewhere like this on your fuel tank so that you can't forget and you can't lose that fuse. So take that out the pack before you start. Now the rest of it might look a little daunting, but let me just show you, it is really very, very easy. We are going to make it less complicated and easier to install. Now at one end of the cable, all we have are our battery connections, our positive and negative connections, which we're going to connect direct to the battery. Now at this end, we don't need to worry about all these cables for the moment because we just want to place the harness on the bike in a place that will give us easy access. So to make this easier, what I always find with this, because it looks like a lot of wires, but in fact there's not a lot there, and I'm going to show you what to do with each of them step by step. And all I tend to do with these is just roll that up into a little bowl like so, take a piece of cloth tape or a piece of insulating tape and just tape them together, something roughly like that, to stop all these cables flapping around. And now it's much easier to see what we're going to do. So the relay is really long. You can mount this in different locations all over the bike, but I think we've got lots of room in this middle section. And I think what we're going to do is I'm going to mount it somewhere like this. So what I've done with the relay harness is as follows. Obviously we tidied these wires up earlier on to make it easier for us to mount everything. And all I've done is I've brought this cable underneath this bar here along the side of the lower toolbox, cable tied it to the chassis rail on this outside edge, and then I've gone underneath both of these bars towards the battery. Now what you can see I've done, because we removed the fuse up here out earlier on, so there is no live to the relay at the moment, we've got a nice easy access to put that fuse back in. And all I've done, I've gone underneath here and along to the positive terminal, and then up to the left hand side to the negative terminal to the battery. So in terms of connecting the relay harness to the motorbike, in terms of the positive and the negative feed, we're done for the moment. And then the harness itself, we don't need to worry about at the moment. We are going to tidy this up as we go along, but this is the general area that I'm going to cable tie it and finish it off neatly later in the installation. So what we have here, this is the contents that you're going to find inside the install kit for the front of the bike. So we've got our locking keys to hold the PCBs in place and to hold the two parts of the housings together. We've got some cable ties, we've got our posi lock, we've got our posi tap and our posi twist, and I'll explain what we use and when we use it as we go through. And we've also got our 3 black cables and our PCBs that are going to give us our dual function on the front. So I'm going to go through this in detail when we do the actual install, but I'll just explain this in a bit more detail. So we've got one long black cable. Now this is about 6 foot long, 2 meters. This is going to go from the rear of the bike to the front. And then we have these 2 shorter black cables. Now these already have the connections on here for connecting to our PCB. Now the PCBs have 3 points of connection on each one. So we've got 3 connections. So already on the bike there is a ground and a feed for the indicator. So we're going to reuse those, but what we want to add is an additional 12 volts to give us our super bright running lights, and that's what these 2 cables are going to do. Then we're going to run one of these wires from the left-hand front indicator all the way underneath the headlight, and then we're going to join all 3 wires inside this indicator housing. It will get clearer as I go through, but it's just easier to explain so you understand the process of what we're going to do. Let's move on. So our preparation work is finished. We're starting on the front left-hand side of the bike. We're going to take one of the 2 short black cables in the front install kit. We've got our end with our terminal on it, which is going to connect to the PCB. But what we're going to start with is this unprepared end. And all we're going to do is we're going to pass it through the housing at the back there like that, and it just comes out here, like so, and then we put it through. So we'll deal with the cable in a moment. So then we've got our 3 connections ready. We've got our additional 12 volts and we've got our original BMW connectors. So then all we need to do is connect these 3 connections to our printed circuit board. Now the printed circuit board is clearly marked. We've got our ground, we've got our T for turn, and our plus over here. So the black wire, this one that we've just added, is going to go to the plus sign. The brown wire is the ground on the BMW indicator. That's going to go to the negative, and the blue is the live feed for the original indicator, and that is going to go to the T on the printed circuit board. So this is really easy. So all we need to do is push these connections firmly onto the PCB like that, black to plus. We're going to take our blue, which is our live, to T on the board like so, push that firmly in, and then we're going to take our ground, which is our brown, and put that on the negative like so. All we need to do is line up these 2 pins on the PCB with the 2 locating holes on the locking key, and then all we do is we gently line it up, and we're going to go in from an angle. We're going to just gently clip that into place like so, and then I'm going to take my thumb, I'm going to push backwards and inwards at the same time, and I'll try and do this in one go. Push firmly inwards, and then that clips into place. So this side is in fact ready for us to put the lens on. We're going to leave the lens off for the moment because we now have to route this cable underneath the headlight. Let me reposition the camera and show you what we're going to do. So then all we're going to do, we're going to be taking this cable, I'm going to pull it all the way through, and then hopefully you can see this on the camera down here. This is the cable we're going to move from the left to the right. We're going to cable tie it to this position here where I'm pointing with my finger. We're going to go underneath this cross brace and then come up on this other side like so, and I'll reposition the camera, and so in effect if I move my hand up, we're going to come up this side and go to the right hand indicator. So now we're looking at the front right hand side of the bike. This is the cable that we've just moved from the front left underneath the metal support bar over to the right hand side. Now what we need to do, we need to get this wire to come out within the inside of this housing, and there is a little trick I can show you that we can use. So what we're going to do, we're going to remove the indicator housing. So that is held on with a TX30. We just remove the screw like so. And then what we're going to do, we're going to take the housing and we're going to rotate it 180 degrees. Watch me, like so, and then that housing will come out of there. So now we have some movement with this cable. And obviously what we want with the one that we've moved from the left-hand side, we want it to exit out of this point here. Now you can fiddle around going in behind this part here, but what I find is the easiest thing to do, I'll have to move the camera, is I'm going to gently pull the cables out of that housing like so, almost completely out, and then push this cable back in like so, and then when I reposition the camera, I've then got somewhere to attach this cable with a bit of cloth tape, and then as I move this cable out, it will pull it through. So let me move the camera. So if I move my hand inside here, this is the indicator, and I can just move that in and out. If I move the indicator in and out like that, you can see the cable, and I just pull that gently through like so, as far as it will go. We're going to take the cable that we fed from the other side, and I'm just going to place a very small piece of cloth tape on here like that, and then this just saves us dismantling more of the bike. And if I move that, pull that cable through and just put that over like that. Hopefully you can see that. And then as I move the cable back through, it then brings the cable very cleverly through to the inside. So now that we've got our cable all the way through over to the right hand side, we can just gently pass that through into the housing over here, and that's ready to make our connections in a moment. So let me move the camera and show you what we're going to do next over on this front right hand side. So we now have our first black cable coming from the front left over to this side, which is the front right. We can move on to the next cable. So we're going to take our long 2-meter cable. This does not have terminals on the end. It doesn't matter which way round we start. So we're going to unravel that. I'm going to pass the cable through the mounting hole up here like this. And what we're going to do, we're going to go diagonally. This is the cable. I'm going to put my hand up here. We're going to come behind this fairing beak, and then we're going to follow along. There comes the cable. We can route that through, and we are actually going to, I'll move the camera again, we're going to follow the fuel tank along, and I'll show you where we're going to put these cable ties. So then what we do with the end of the black cable here, we then pass that through into the housing like so. So we've got our second cable in there like that. What I'll do now, I'll reposition the camera. We're going to put this back onto this mounting, and then we can get on with putting that printed circuit board and connecting it up inside here. Let me move the camera. Remounting the indicator is just a reverse of how we took it off. We want the mounting port facing the front. We place it in like so, turn it 180 degrees, and then we can put our TX30 back into place to hold the housing firmly to the front of the bike like so. So that's now back in place. Let me move the camera and show you what we're going to do with these connections. So now we've got our indicator mounted back on, and we've got our 2 black wires. Now obviously these are too long at the moment. What we need to do is re-establish which of these 2 cables is the cable that goes from this indicator towards the back of the bike. So we're just going to take the excess of the cable and gently pull it, and now we can see it's this cable here, and I can tug it backwards and forwards like so, and I'm going to pull it through until we've got approximately, it doesn't have to be absolute, around about 10 centimeters of cable length here. And then what we can do, this is obviously the cable that goes to the front left hand side. We can cut that to a similar length like so. And then what we're going to do, we're going to take our last cable, this one here, this is the second of the short cables, and if we unravel it, we don't need all this length. All we need is a similar sort of length, so I'll cut that. Now we need to cut it so that we've got this terminal end, because this is what we're going to use to connect to our PCBs. So I'll cut that at around 10 centimeters like so, so we've got our 3 wires. So then with our 3 black wires, what we need to do is we need to pair them. We're going to take, using our strimmers, we're going to take about 1.5 centimeters off of that wire like so. And then we can rotate that. We're holding the metal core. That's one prepared. We'll take the next wire. We'll take another 1.5 centimeters off like so. And then same again, rotate that. And then the same on the last one. We'll trim off about 1.5 centimeters like so. And then twist those cores, those inner cores together. So then what we have, we've got our 3 black cables. We bring them level, and I'll try and do this and show you at the same time. We bring them level like so. We rotate all 3 of those cables together. Hopefully you can see that like so. Well, then we're going to take our blue cap. Well, now we're going to take the side that's got the hole in it. We're going to pass it over the top so that the inner core sticks through, and then that is going to sit on the inside. Now the inside of this part here is conical shaped, and it's going to grip all of these wires firmly together. So if I put the cap on and I gently start to rotate it like so. Now the important thing is here, once it starts to nip up, we're going to hold this bottom firmly like so, and then I'm going to rotate that cap and I can feel it really start to grip inside. Now that has gripped firmly all of our black. Give that a really good tug. That's gripped all of our black wires. So now we've made our connections, these 3 black wires, just to go through them one more time. We've got 1 cable coming from the harness on the back of the bike, one cable going off to the front left indicator, and then this one is going to go to our front right indicator. So let me now get the PCB and show you how we do our connections and what we're going to do with this. So just as we did on the opposite side, we got our PCB, we've got a positive, a negative, and a T for turn. So the first one we're going to connect is the new Weiser black wire. That is going to go to the plus here on the bottom, and they just push firmly onto the PCB like so. We're then going to take our blue, which is our live feed. That's going to the T connector here, and we push that one firmly on like so, and we take our last one, which is our brown, which is the ground, and that's going to go to the negative on the bottom of the PCB, and we push that firmly on like so. And then all we need to do, this will in fact sit inside at the back here, so we just rotate that assembly inside there like so. We take our PCB, we go in at an angle onto those locking pins on this corner like this. We give that a gentle wiggle, push firmly, and then that's it. So our PCB is located on the locking pin on the inside. We've got our 3 connectors. We're ready to start on the rear of the bike. So with regards to cable routing from the front of the bike all the way to the back, this is what we've done. So the cable itself, I will put a close-up picture of the top brace behind this plastic housing so you can see where I've put the cable tie and where I've routed the cable. And in essence, I've come out at the top here along the top of the fuel tank, one piece of cloth tape here to hold it in position. Then I've come along across the top and I've gone behind the breather hose here directly down. And then I've attached 2 cable ties. This plastic panel, by the way, this just lifts off. It's only held in with 2 rubber bungs. 2 cable ties here following the suspension lines. In fact, you can see the cable tie here, following it along here. And then I've gone behind the battery underneath these 2 cross braces. I've used another small cable tie at the end, and then I've got my excess cable up here. So I've got plenty of room. I've got about 10 inches to a foot of cable, and we'll do the connections to the Weiser harness later on. So what I can do now, I'm happy with the cable routing. I'm happy it's out the way. It doesn't interfere with the air filter. It's not interfering with anything that needs to be serviced when the bike goes to the dealership. We can put the side panels back on, and then we can move on to the rear of the bike. So what you see here are the contents of the rear installation kit. We have our locking keys that hold both of those 2 parts of the housing together and also enable us to get a correct position for these printed circuit boards. We've got our posi locks, we've got 2 of those, we've got a posi tap, we've got our posi twist. I'll explain what these are for and how to use them as we go through. We've got some additional cable ties, and then we have our 4 additional cables. So I've laid it out like this to make this explanation a bit easier. So with regards to these printed circuit boards on the back, we're going to have 3 functions. Now to have 3 functions, we need 4 wires. We need a ground and an indicator. They're already present on your motorbike. We're going to reuse those, and they're going to go to the minus sign for the ground and the T for the positive, which is T for turn. But then we still have to add 2 additional feeds. Now what we have here, we have black, which is going to go to the plus sign, and we have grey, which is going to go to the B for brake. So this is actually very easy to install, but I just thought I'd lay it out like this because it helps understanding what we're going to connect much easier. So let me show you how to fit the kit. So now working on the rear of the bike, we need to put our additional cables into these rear indicator housings. So we have our original blue and brown cables. Now what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take 1 grey and 1 black cable from the rear installation pack, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put both of these in at the same time. I'm going to take a very small piece of cloth tape and I'm going to place it over those cables like that, because that will just make it easier for what we're about to do, and just gently push that together. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to feed these 2 cables together at the same time through the housing here at the back. Now I will move the camera and show you, but you can put your finger in the back here, or your thumb, and if I look what I'm doing while I'm talking to you, you can in fact just reach inside and gently push those cables through, and hopefully you can see that cable's come through already. So I'll feed a bit more through like so. Then I'm going to take this cable and go underneath the cross brace and towards the rear. So I'll move the cables through for both of them, and then all we need to do is bring them through like that, and then we can do our connections in a moment. So let me do the other side and I'll show you how we do our connection to the PCB. So now we've got our 4 cables mounted on both indicators on the rear, it's time to connect the PCB. So I'll put a close-up of this on the screen and I'll just explain these connections. So on the bottom here we have minus and a T. This is for the original BMW cables. These two here, we've got minus, which is for the brown cable, and we've got T, which is the turn, which is the blue cable. So that's where we're going to connect those. Then up the top we have a B and a plus. The B is for the brake light, which is the grey cable, and the plus is the extra plus 12 volts that we add for the running lights. So that's where we're going to connect it. So we'll start with the black. So black cable goes to the plus at the top, and they just push on like so. We're going to take the grey cable and add it to the B directly below the black cable like so. Push firmly on. Then we're on to the original BMW cables. We're going to take the blue wire. This is going to connect to the T terminal. That just pushes on. And then the last one is the ground cable, and that goes on to the negative right at the bottom like so. So they're all firmly pushed in place. So we can pull any excess that we've got through of those cables. We turn the PCB over, just push them in a little bit like that. Now, as we did with the front, we've got our locking key here. This has the 2 cutouts that are going to locate into these pins. We're going to go at an angle first, like this. We just gently offer them up like so. This edge starts to clip in, then we push in with our thumb and we're going to go inwards, and then that clicks into place. And it really is very easy to do. So we'll repeat the process on the other side. The connections are the same, and then we can move on. So now we're working at the tail of the bike. We've got our 2 black cables and our 2 grey cables. I'll just leave them out there for the moment. And I've added 2 cable ties. Now I've put the cable ties on to help you understand which cable we're looking for next during the installation. So obviously at some point in the installation, we are going to need to take 2 trigger feeds from the tail light unit. So the tail light has a connection, it's a plug that sits down here. All we want to do is identify correctly which cable that is. So it's this one here, and the way we can tell is if we can get hold of that with our fingers on one end and we grab the other end and we can push and pull it, so we know that we can't make a mistake, it's definitely this cable. And then I've cable tied the black and the grey cables to it, so I know that this has been identified correctly, because of course there are 2 other cables, the ones that go to the indicator on each side. So now we can cut these off. So what I'm going to do, this cable here that is wrapped up with a protective layer, inside there are 3 cables. There's a ground, there is a feed for our tail light, and there is a feed for our brake light. And what we want to do is expose those 3 wires. We're not going to cut them, but I'm going to get a Stanley knife in a moment and carefully peel this back about 5 centimeters so that we can get access to these cables. So let me do that and I'll show you what we do next. So I've carefully peeled back this outer sheathing to reveal the 3 wires inside, and what we're going to find, we've got a brown wire. This central one, as you're looking at it, that is the ground wire. Then over here, this upper wire, this is black and grey with a yellow band, and the black and grey are running through the cable. And then the lower one, this one here, this is a grey and red cable with a yellow band. So we'll come back to this in a moment. What I'll do now, I'll reposition the camera and we'll start making our connections. So moving on to the connections. So the wiring harness that we laid earlier on, I've added 1 cable tie here to add a bit of stability. We'll tidy it up when we're completely finished. Now, as I explained earlier on with the Weiser harness, there are 6 cables. We've already connected it to the battery. We've removed the fuse, so there's no live at the moment. And then what I've done, we've got our signal wires, these ones here, which are the yellow and the red, and I've moved them out of the way for the moment. And then we've got our black and our grey wires, which, as we talked about earlier on, we know they are outputs. So we'll come to the black in a minute. So we're going to do the grey first. So then I've separated the black and the greys that come from the indicators on the rear, so that we've got our two, one from the left, one from the right, and the grey from the visor harness, and all we need to do is join and connect these. Now I suggest you do leave yourself plenty of cable in case you get this wrong or you make a mistake, so that you can come back if you need to and shorten the cable and remake your connection. So I'm going to give myself something like that, about 10 centimeters of free play, and then about the same with the grey one. So then I'm going to take off, as we did earlier on, about 1.5 centimeters of cable, of outer cable, and then I'll twist that there. We want about 1.5 centimeters off of the other side, like so. Twist them together, and then on the one that comes from the relay, again about 1.5 centimeters, something like that. Give that a twist, and then what we need to do, we need to then bring in our posi twist. Now this is going to hold them tightly together, so we unscrew it. Remember what we said earlier on, the base is conical shaped, and this puts the pressure and joins all the connections, and then we've got our cap with the hole. So then what we need to do is we're going to bring these three together like so, level them up. Hopefully you can see that on the camera. Then I'm going to twist firmly and join all three together like so. Hopefully you can see that. Then I'll place the cap like this over the top, holding the base, and then take the cap and then slowly start to tighten that up, and you just start to feel it grip there. And I want to make sure that this lot is pushed firmly inside. So I'm going to hold the whole thing, give it a good push, move my fingers along, and I'm going to hold the base and then rotate that cap tightly so it grips, and then that grips firmly those wires inside. So that's our connection with, and we'll tidy all this up later on. So that is our connection with our three grey wires. So the next one we need to do is the black cable. Now we've got 4 to connect. We've got the one coming from the relay. We've got 2 cables coming from those indicators on the rear, and of course this one here, this is our front to rear cable. So we do in fact need to join all 4 cables. So what I'm going to do, this one, I don't want to make that any shorter than it is. I think the one coming from the harness is going to be fine, and then these, I think we'll do the similar sort of thing. We'll give ourselves a good 10 centimeters, and we'll cut those off like so. And then we can start prepping the cable. So again, exactly as we did before, we're going to take about 1.5 centimeters off of and then we just need to make sure that we get all 4 of these together like this in order. And I'll use my fingernail, and then hopefully you can then see they're all in the right place. And then a firm twist of all 4 of those. Bearing in mind we've got 1.5 centimeters. We're going to take the cap, place the cap over the top like so that we've got our cables sticking through. I'm going to hold those cables firmly, and the base, we're going to take the cap, put the cap on, and as you starts to grip, again we want to make sure that this is all pushed firmly inside. Hold the bottom, continue twisting like this, and then that conical shape inside that cap holds everything really firmly together. So that's our black wires done. So let's move on to what we're going to need to do for our trigger feeds. So with the sheathing carefully pulled back out the way, we can see our 3 wires inside. So running through the center is our brown wire, that is the ground. Then we have a grey and a black wire. This is our brake light trigger feed. We're going to be connecting that to the yellow wire, and then the other one is a grey and a red wire. This is our running light stroke number plate light, and we're going to connect that to the red wire. So what I've done, I've cut these, I've given myself about 14-15 centimeters of length. We can now take back about 1 centimeter, just under 1 centimeter of those outers like so. like that, and then do the same for the yellow, just under 1 centimetre of that outer off, like so, and give them a twist like that. And then we can start using the posi-tap connectors. So what we're going to do, the posi-tap have got 3 parts. We're going to unscrew them, and what we want is the grey end. Now, if we take the grey cap off, there is an end with a very sharp point, and you can see it and feel it with your finger. The other end is a flat end. So we want the end with the sharp point. So if I put that to one side for the moment, what we actually want to do, we want to place this cap with this cutout through the center, and I'll put some close-ups on the screen so that you can see this in more detail, so that we have the cable, if I can get that on the camera, the cable running through the center of there. And then all we do, we take the body, the middle section of this red one, making sure we've got the end with that point on it, and then we very carefully put that on and we start to screw it on. Now, it is important to say that we do not want to let the cable twist or rotate. So we're actually going to hold the grey section on the bottom. So if I hold tightly the bottom, and then we can screw the red part on like so, and then that pierces a very small hole in that cable. So if I turn that around, you can just see there's about 1 millimetre of gap. We don't want to do it really, really tight. It just needs to be nipped, and it will pierce a hole in the cable. So we're going to do the same with the second one. We're going to take our 2 parts. We've got our grey base, we've got our middle section with our point. We're going to take the base and then let that other cable, this one here, run through the middle like so, and we're going to go slightly off to one side like this. Then I'm going to take the middle body with the point on it, gently start to screw that on the top, remembering I need to hold this grey base firmly with my fingers and then do that up. And it's not really tight. Again, if I turn it sideways, you can see we've got about 1 millimetre of gap. So those 2 are ready for our final connections. So then we can take the last part of the posi-tap, which is the cap, and we start with, let's have a look, we move those out of the way. We're going to start with the red wire. So the red wire is going to go to the grey and red wire. We're going to take the cap, slide it on like so, take the center and pass it into the middle of the body here. And I'll put some close-ups on the screen for you. Push it in firmly, and then gently start to do that cap up. Now at this point it's important to understand that what we want to do is hold the body, not the grey bottom, not the top. We want to hold the body and then do the cap up tightly like so, and you'll start to feel some resistance. It doesn't have to be super tight. Again, we're going to have about 1 millimetre of gap, and then just give that wire a good tug. That's clearly caught that one nice and tight, and then we do the same with the yellow. We pass the cap over there first of all, place the inner core in the center like so, take the cap. It's actually quite hard to film and show you this all in one go. Screw that in. I'm going to hold the middle of this body and screw the cap neatly. Again, it doesn't have to be too firm. And then the way we're going to test this, we're going to hold the middle, the body, and then give both of these a good tug, and they've really got a nice tight fit. So we'll tidy this up in a moment. What we want to do now is just go through in our head exactly what we've done. So we've got the red wire going to the grey and red wire. We've got the yellow wire going to the grey and black wire. We've got all 3 of our grey connectors joined in one of these posi twists, and we've got all 4 of our black connectors in the other one here. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to refit the fuse, which we took out right at the beginning of the process, and we can do a test and make sure we're okay, and then I can show you what we're going to do in terms of tidying this section up under here. So we've installed the fuse, we've done our test, everything's working as it should do. Now it's time to tidy up underneath the tail unit. So inside the kit there are more than enough cable ties to do this. So I've got the Weiser relay underneath here, underneath the BMW loom, and then I've just used some additional cable ties to group together the 3 grey cables and the 4 black cables. Now the only thing I haven't done yet, but it would be a good idea for you to do at this point, is to add a bit of security, a bit of covering for these two connectors. Now you can use insulating tape and you can just wrap them up. What I tend to do on the back of the bikes is use a piece of cloth tape and then come underneath here and then fold the cloth tape like a sandwich, like that, clamp it together and clamp both of these connectors inside a piece of cloth tape, and it stops them moving around. But I do have some more work to do on this bike, so I don't want to do that just yet. So we finished under the back. All we need to do now is repeat the installation of all the parts that we took off during the beginning. Let's move on. So as you've just seen, it is incredibly easy to fit the dual function modules on the front and the triple functions on the rear. We've got those two options. We've got option 1 and option 2, so it will comply with different lighting laws and regulations in the different countries. In the video description below, you'll find the links to all the products. If you are in North America, you want to go to Weisertechnik.com. If you're in Europe or the United Kingdom, you want to go to Weisertechnik.co.uk, and all the links are in the video below. So what's coming up next? We've still got one more video to do with lighting changes on these early generation bikes. I'm going to be fitting the full Weiser-Technik Evo Extreme kit next. That's another video coming up. But thank you very much. If you made it this far into the video, well done. It has been another long video. I've enjoyed today, and I'll see you soon. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.